Greetings, nerds. This is SNN Nerd. I'm your host, Sarah Belmont, and with me, as always, is our Mr. Producer, Will Polk. How are you doing today, Will?
Doing very well, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm just wondering why, this weekend or this past week, everybody is spiraling out of control on Twitter about little fandoms and casting news. And it's like, guys, we have San Diego Comic-Con right around the corner. Yeah. Literally, we have it's like Christmas.
Yeah.
we're
Christmas in July.
Right there.
Yeah.
Just take it down a notch. Like, all of your questions will be answered, or some of them, and then you'll be teased with more. But still, come on. It's this time of year when we're able to get so excited. I mean, literally, Marvel's going to drop their next slate of films.
Right.
What more do you want?
Yeah, well, people want more. People want more. Well, it's interesting that you say that. I think it's, you go through a season and it's really no off season. Sort of like the NBA and free agency now. It's like some of the stuff that happens outside of the four corners of the game are sometimes more interesting what's happening on the court. And it seems that that's sort of been this week because, well, one, all the shows are at least at the Arrowverse, are returning to Vancouver and starting up their production for their respective seasons. And of course, we have the last season of Arrow, which is coming out upon us. And we got casting news this week that Colin Donnell and Josh Segarra are coming back for the final season. And Kat McNamara was promoted to series regular. So, of course, that will get some folks like chirping about, well, we're seeing all this news. What about Emily Bett? And so, well, as you rightly pointed out before we started recording, she's kind of busy in New York right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw an interview shortly after it was announced that she was leaving where she basically said it's kind of up to the showrunners if she is going to return in season 8, but that's not a likely possibility because it would have to work with the schedule of the plays she's doing.
Right.
So also, I actually lost all hope after reading that, and I'm like, oh, maybe she won't appear.
Yeah, there's that. And also just, I guess this too, it depends on what the story that they're telling in season 8 and will it narratively make sense to bring her back?
Well, I mean, for me, Arrow ended probably like in season 6. We're now going through what I like to call the Black Star pilot. And it's just going to keep continuing and continuing. If you liked the last half of the last season, then be excited for the next season because that's all we're going to get, a little more of that.
Right. Yeah, a little bit more of that, yeah. I mean, we did get a few little teasers this week as far as I guess the title for the episode 1, I guess Starling City. So there's little nuggets being dropped to get us to Crisis. Head over to Central City and they're back at work and saw some still photos of the cast. And I guess Killer Frost has a new suit. Looks pretty cool. And of course we saw Godspeed. Looks like he is going to be a villain. I don't know if it's going to be one of those deals like the start of season 3 where we had the one reverse flash from Jay's era, just sort of a one-stop pop, and then we won't see it again, or is this going to be season long? But, we did see that. And then a real thing that definitely got the interwebs ablaze on Thursday or Friday, I guess, was Grant's Instagram story.
Mm-hmm.
And how he had posted a story and post on his feed, for coming out in support of LGBTQ rights, and he's been very vocal in that standpoint in the past, and of course that really set off a lot of the fandom as far as why aren't you coming out as strong in support for Candice, and it just spiraled on his feed and Instagram, and he posted a video basically saying that, just to give it some context. I know many fans and fans of color feel that, and we've seen it. I mean, anybody who's been on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram sees the kind of postings that Candice gets and the hate that she gets. I mean, she had the ultimate put down with someone this past week when they were complaining about the CW having all these gay characters and whatever, and she had the ultimate clap back. She's like, look, I grew up with white superheroes and I turned out okay, and thank you for watching. So and that's just one sample of, that's a tame one compared to some of the stuff that she gets. But that being said, it was Grant basically coming out very strongly saying that our Iris is an African American actress. She's black, she's beautiful, and she is our Iris and always gonna be. And she's Barry's in game. Candice plays her and will continue to play her, and I have her back. And period. So let's put that out there. And where I think a lot of fans were appreciative of it. I know there's some felt it was too little, too late. I know I put a query on our Twitter page just to see how fans felt about his comments.
How do you feel about it?
Yeah, how do I feel about it? So I've thought about this, and my personal feelings is I'm glad he said something. I think he has been supportive. I mean, I think back, I believe it was maybe San Diego Comic-Con before the 3rd or 4th season. I remember he wearing the "We Are the Flash" hat, and so I think he's been very supportive in a very low key kind of way.
I feel like the problem is he's not Stephen Amell. I feel like at the end of the day, that's the problem that the fandom is having, because with the Arrow fandom, Stephen Amell has always been like not only the lead of the show, but really the face of the show. And for whatever reason, Grant Gustin, he's on par, if not better, of an actor than Stephen Amell, but he also lacks the Grant Gustin charisma off the camera. Yeah. Like, he's not about that publicity and creating a brand name for himself, especially considering some of the choices he's made to do. And he's a very private person, so he tends to not post as much. He doesn't have as big as a social media presence. So I honestly think I understand why people are saying too little, too late. At the same time, he probably either he was being supportive, but not in a way that we would recognize as it. Yeah. Because I'm sure he was being supportive to Candice, like, offline.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's a world called offline. But I mean, he doesn't have that presence where he's just going to go out there, and for whatever reason he chose now. At the same time, I also think that maybe he's doing some of his own publicity damage control. Yeah. Since there was that vaping video, and there's been a few other actions that people are raising their eyebrows at. So I feel like for whatever reason, because these shows are so similar, and we admit to this all the time. I mean, often when we talk about one, we compare it to the other. Well, I feel like in a way the fandoms are doing the same thing, where it's like, if Emily Bett gets disrespected or somebody else gets I forget who originated that one post about feeling like the sets were unsafe. And Stephen Amell was all over that. And so was Grant to a degree, but it's like apples and oranges between those two.
Yeah, it is. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it is. Because I thought back and just doing prep for the show, I did look at the incident with Andrew Kreisberg with the sexual harassment.
Right.
And your point is exactly there, in that, Steven and some of the other male actors on the show were very, very quick to jump and say, this is wrong, unacceptable, we don't accept it. And Grant finally did post, but it was, I think a day or a few days after the initial story broke. And so I think you do have a point there, that he is a very private person, and he's admitted to as much. And I think it is personality, that he is very, very low key compared to, say, Stephen, who is very outspoken, and sometimes that does get Steven in trouble. I mean, just look at his comments with Beyonce and Coachella.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he is also very quick to stand up for castmates, and and as some of the other actors too. I mean, even Mehcad Brooks from Supergirl was very vocal and standing up for Candice in social media before. So I think you are. I think you do have a good point that Grant is probably a little more reticent to sort of stick out there, but I think he did feel that for whatever reason this was the time to finally stand up to it, because maybe he finally got fed up with the stuff on his feed and just said, okay, once and for all, I'm going to put this out there. And even in the videos himself, he's like, maybe I haven't been as active and as loud as I should have been in the past, but I'm going to make it clear once and for all. And,
or maybe that like big comment that everybody saw that she had to deal with, and she dealt with it very well. It sparked in him like, you know what, I'm gonna say something now, because this goes beyond just a casting decision, and more in terms of like the overall Arrowverse that they've built and being criticized. So maybe he felt like a need to speak up, just like in general, and a reminder that at the end of the day, Candice is in that position as Iris West, and that's a very big part of the show, and she is African American. So you know what, if you want something else, watch something else.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And yeah, so I guess, again, my personal feelings is I'm glad he said it. Maybe he should have said something sooner, but I mean, I'm not going to be like too little too late and be mad that he did. I mean, I'm glad he stood up for his castmate. And, I think I hope he is going forward very vocal when this kind of crap does pop up on social media, and just say, look, we're a family, we're a team, and I have my castmates back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we're back into discussing our regular TV shows, and we are going to cover Swamp Thing and Krypton. How about let's start with Swamp Thing?
Yes, we can start with Swampy.
Swampy. I like, there's a few things I could start with this. It was a good episode. I mean, I think we called it in the pilot that Alec eventually will be back, and that was this episode where finally Alec and Abby are able to connect with him in his human form. I'm still very confused as to why his voice changes when he becomes Swamp Thing. I question if the actor is actually dressed up in that suit or if it's a different actor entirely. And then that's a bit confusing. I don't think it's necessary for his voice to change. Just saying.
Yeah, it is a different actor. So Derek Mears plays, does a lot of monster work, plays Alec when he's in costume. Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll see. You know more than I knew it was somebody different, because I'm just like, there's something about this. It's very weird, because this isn't our first time covering a show where one of the characters was like wearing visually different, because Brendan Fraser, like, we speculated, is he in that suit? Because whatever robot man on Doom Patrol, when he was moving around, you're just like, that's like how Brendan Fraser would do it. So it's interesting to me. But then again, inconsistency in DC, what are you going to do?
Nah, it's just you see this all the time where you have someone. I mean, Darth Vader. I mean, had David Prost in the suit, and James Earl Jones doing the voice. So I mean, there's precedent there.
Meanwhile, they can't even be consistent about whether to use CGI flowers or real flowers, because there's a whole sequence in this episode where he shows Abby the green, quote unquote, which is the good part of the swamp and where life grows, and it's beauty. And they're walking through the swamp, and I just love it, because in the background, like, a little flower blooms right away, and it's totally CGI. Like, it was like they went into the computer and just through like word or art. I forget what the program is called, but they just sketched on a flower and had it bloom. Like
Yeah.
it was really bad and really distracting for me. And then I was questioning him like, well, why did that flower have to be CGI when clearly everything else is just fake flowers that they threw on the set?
Yeah. Yeah. I just, until you brought that up, I really didn't notice it. I guess I was really, yeah, I wasn't quibbling with it. If anything, when I was watching that scene as they were walking through the swamp and it was all bright, it's just nice to have some light in this series for a change, because
True.
it's so dark. So I really didn't. It was. I did think, I was like, wow, this is a nice practical effect and nice change of pace for where we've been. But I want to go backtrack a little bit to the when we first started with the Swamp Thing itself, as far as Alec and Abby and the I guess the hallucinogenic properties of the CGI flower that gave her allowed her to see him in human form. And I just want to get your thoughts on whether or not, two things. The first is, when we first talked about this show in the pilot, uh, with the relationship, one, do you feel that by him going back to human form undermined some of the depth that they have built with the relationship as Alex been Swamp Thing? And then the second thing is, do you think we'll see it again?
So I was actually, for some reason, I figured that we were going to talk about this because you and we haven't been the nicest people in terms of the romance on the show.
Yeah.
We're like, how is this going to... I actually, like, to your point about how seeing the flowers in the swamp was a breath of fresh air, I think seeing Alec in human form was a breath of fresh air that this show needed, this season needed. And also in terms of their relationship, I didn't find that it undermined anything with Abby's dynamic with Swamp Thing. It actually really supported everything that they had built thus far, because they had done enough where clearly there's an attraction or a pull. I'll say a pull between these two characters. And she's a scientist just like he is, and she wants to understand. But now he, just like how her watching everything occurring come out of the swamp and trying to fix everything, she's still stuck on that like scientific part. Yeah. Well, he's been he also was previously a scientist. Now that he's become Swamp Thing, he's like, well, what is this? Who am I? Where's my humanity? Or will I lose myself? And so those are like two parts of the puzzle that I think through this episode really connected for me, because you understood more. Like, there's a lot of different layers to this dynamic. It's not just an attraction that once was, or a lost lover. It's more about people finding connection through wanting to heal one another. And science and beauty, and the difference between cosmic or between science and faith and belief. So I think there's a lot of different elements.
Yeah. See, I'm glad you thought that, because at first and brought those things up, because for me it felt like, because of some of the feelings I had, where I didn't feel like the relationship had deepened to the point where she would feel this way about him. But we've had to up to this point, they're growing in their relationship, whatever it's, through science, through love, through just hope, or whatever. So whenever he saw her, whenever he basically made it so that she could see him in human form again. At first, I was kind of like, given that this is kind of that Beauty and Beast kind of feel to their relationship, I was at first I did feel like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't she love him in whatever form he comes in? And so when I asked the question, did I think like it undermined their relationship or whatever? I guess I felt it was. I guess it was this quote unquote traditional notions of beauty that was sort of getting thrust into this story, and so I don't know if it was because, and maybe it's because maybe it's Alec's way of how he feels grotesque, and maybe it is Abby does see beyond what he looks like, and maybe it's Alec's feeling that he's the grotesque monster, and maybe that's why he felt he needed to do that.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because his whole thing for up until this episode was, I don't know who I am now. And so he's struggling with how do I become Alec again? Because now I'm this other thing. I'm this creature. I am a monster, and I want to keep her out of here. And there's danger where I have to be now. Mm-hmm. So, and to go back to your point about her having to love him in any form, I think actually I'm going to take back what I said in the pilot and how they set this up incorrectly, because they having these two, it's not that there was a romance gone wrong between these two before. They literally met in the pilot episode. There was a connection because they were dealing with this disease that was plaguing the city, and for whatever reason there was a little attraction, and then she's changed now because she's always viewed him as a patient. Mm-hmm. So I know that there is probably something psychologically that occurs like when a doctor treats a patient and there's like some form of attraction. So it's weird. I'm rambling. I have a lot of different thoughts and none of them make coherent sense at the moment. I apologize.
Oh no! I mean, I think this is why the show has really connected with folks, in that the very things that we're discussing as far as their relationship, and how Alex sees himself, and as this grotesque monster. Abby, I think to your point, where you were just saying, she first saw him as a patient, but also, there was an attraction there, and I think she, what I was thinking of earlier, I think is Alec who, basically did that. So he's feeling like a monster, and so he wants her to see him in this quote unquote, normal light. But I think Abby has grown to appreciate Alec in whatever form he's in. Mm-hmm. To your point, and as far as why that, looking back, it's good that they set it up the way that they did in the pilot, because it did allow her to get to know him, because he's still Alec, even though he looks like Swamp Thing. I mean, he's still at his core Alec Holland, and so she got to know him at a different level, and so I think it does deepen their connection here. And to your point about him wanting her to be out of danger, I mean, that pretty much is one of those things that has gone through this season, and in particular this episode, and how this episode ended.
Right. I do think that this show would not be as good if Crystal Reed was not pulling off her acting as well. Like, she's doing a really good job. She really is holding it all together. I'll be honest, I find her story arcs, especially when they're she's interacting with Alec or Swamp Thing, are the best parts of the episodes. Learning more about Abby and that character, and that makes sense. And another really strength of this season is one of my favorite characters, Dr. Woodrow. We have a confirmation, it is Alzheimer's that his wife is experiencing and going through. Yeah. So we did get confirmation that his wife is having Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. Essentially, her memory and her mind is rotting away, pun intended. So it's actually a really interesting parallel because on one hand you have Alec and Abby, who are, it's a new romance, it's a new relationship, yet it has this big barrier of Swamp Thing and the swamp and what's going on with the swamp and the darkness. And then you have this other relationship, which from day one, we were introduced to these two people, both scientists, loving, good relationship. They stand up for one another. They believe in one another. And yet she is slowly becoming a different person because of her illness. And all signs are pointing towards what's going to happen with that dynamic, considering how much he wants to preserve her memory and her love for him.
That is one of the more deep relationships in the show, and the motivations that Dr. Woodrow has, and wanting to continue to work in the swamp and learning more about it, and we finally figure out what Danny Ian's character's role in the story is, which is he's just basically a guinea pig.
Yep.
And for many things, because in that we had that flashback scene, and I can't remember if it was this episode or the episode prior. I think it was the episode prior, where he was on set as the stuntman and making the deal with the quote unquote producer there, who actually probably was someone that Sunderland and clearly was someone Sunderland and the Conclave and all these people were working to, do whatever accelerant they were putting in the swamp, and how whatever deal he made to ended up getting him stuck in this town. But then, his now becoming the sort of test subject for what Dr. Woodrow has developed that he was going to use to save his wife.
Or not save his wife and really pretty much kill himself.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how I love both of those relationships. I love how all of those characters are integrated into this show that's really about a small town. Here's the other side of it, Will. This is the what do they call the rot in the swamp? Old person drama, melodrama, soap opera, if you will. Man, it drove me crazy, because essentially what happens is Matt knows about Swamp Thing, knows that Alec is still alive. So him being the good mama's boy that he is, tells, of course, who's the sheriff, who's been having an affair with Avery. And so there's a whole of this soap opera and everything, and we're supposed to be shocked at the end of it because they want to take Avery out, and Maria wants his business and profits and to finally just get rid of him. And then Maria, I forgot the best part. Matt is technically Avery's son.
I love that twist with Lucilla and Maria working together to take out Avery. The whole dynamic there with them and Matt being Avery's son. God, what type of twist was that? But I could see it because what leverage that he had over, and and he basically was using that to his advantage. Yeah, Lucille.
You say it's a good twist. I'm just so beyond over it, and I haven't liked Virginia Madsen's character at all throughout the season because I feel like she just slows down the episodes.
I would agree, but I think she finally got, even if she slows things down, I think, and maybe because they had to quickly rewrite episodes. I think it was about this episode where they got the word that they were going to that the show was canceled.
Which makes sense, because I do believe that ending, not the twist with Matt. The twist with Matt actually makes a little bit of sense. Is it needed for the season? No. But, it does make sense. And I understand why they went there, because they were showing us that Avery is unfaithful and is a very duplicitous type of person, so of course he's going to have affairs. Now Virginia Madsen's character, and yes, that's what she will be called throughout this entire she felt like a different character. Like, it was not the same person who was in any of the previous, and that's why it was so weird to me, because I'm like, what? And also, like, why do I even care? Because there's something off here. So yeah, that would make sense if the rewriting took place.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, because you're right. From this episode, it was definitely a more forceful character, because up to this point, she has been, all about Shauna, and I don't even think Shauna was mentioned in this episode, was she? And all the, angst about that loss and everything, and then now she, it was like a whole new spin where she is like, okay, so Avery doesn't come back to dinner, but you know what? I'm going to like salvage this thing with the guy from the Conclave, and I'm going to seal the deal so I can get control of this thing.
Yeah, Shauna was not mentioned at all. Nobody cares about her anymore. Nobody cares about how she died. So it felt like everything else in the episode made sense as to why we were going there, and I felt like it was continuing to build off of previous episodes, except for that twist at the end with Maria and Lucille. Like, I'm just like, really? No wonder it got canceled.
Very well, very, very daytime soap too for you.
It just, I feel like, especially Avery is way too much of a twisting mustache villain for me. And Virginia Madsen is an amazing actress.
Yeah.
And yet on the show, I don't feel like she's doing a whole lot. Like, I can see the acting, so to speak. I don't feel like I can't remember her character's name, so of course I don't think she's really has a presence on this show.
Right.
So... Right. And add on the sheriff, it's a lot melodrama, and it just slows everything else down, when really I think Swamp Thing should have more screen time than dealing with all of that BS.
Yeah, well, I know we've talked before, Swamp Thing himself, sort of secondary character in his own show, and yeah, I think that definitely does make that point. But I guess we'll see in the next few episodes how all this conclave and what Dr. Woodrow developed and now has funding for, and how that is interrelated to, I guess, the rot in the swamp. Obviously, we'll get some answers for that.
Yeah. All right. Let's shift gears and head over to Krypton. We're talking in season 2, episode 5, A Better Yesterday. This show just kills me every single time. Okay, this is where I want to start, because I don't know at what point in this episode it struck me, but I feel like something we haven't talked about is how interesting this show is, because it is technically a superhero genre show. Mm-hmm. Technically. But is there really a superhero in the show? And if not, because it really should be Seg who's the hero, but he's not technically a superhero.
Right.
So what struck me this episode is how this season, the writers are very sneakily building this theme of duality. And which is very important for a superhero genre show, because there's always like that debate between power and responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like that duality, like being Clark Kent and Superman. Like those are two different characters.
Yep.
And can you be both at the same time, and what that does to you as a person? Mm-hmm. Well, it struck me because, I mean, we already established Nyssa is a clone. So you have Nyssa, but then this clone version of her, and and she's going back and forth between being a mom and wanting to resist against General Zod. So she's having to make some compromises. Lyta is brainwashed.
Or is she?
Again, Well, I thought she was. Why isn't she brainwashed?
Well, Sod makes the point that many of the things that she did on her own accord.
She's brainwashed. And and Zod, and there's even a line about this, like he's acting as both, he portrays himself as the savior of Krypton, but he's also the oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the hero and villain, like is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? And then Seg, like the guiding light of the show, literally has Brainiac still within him.
Yep.
Which, like, I love it because that's exactly, it's so creative how they got there, and they are able to examine duality, and in a show where you don't have that stereotypical hero who has those two different lives that you can really play off of,
mm-hmm.
but they still manage to bring that to the show.
Yeah, that's that's probably the best breakdown I've heard about the show. It really is. I mean, and if I had to explain, if someone asked me what the show's about, I think you have succinctly captured it right there. It is that duality, and even though it's based in the superhero genre, for the very reasons you just articulated, is why this show works.
And why it works with so many villains.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's another thing that struck me in watching it, specifically this episode, is how, like, seamlessly, and I'm talking seamlessly, they're able to both give us a good picture of who Zod is, mm-hmm. where he comes from, what he wants, why he is that villain person, and why there is conflict there and really interesting parallels. And then also Brainiac.
Yeah.
I mean, God. I'm sorry. I'm jumping all the way to the end now. The best sequence in this episode is when literally Seg is trying to escape with Jaina and Deb, and Brainiac takes over, and for a moment he really does have this superpower, and it just like lit me up so much because it felt like a video game.
It totally did. And that's another thing I like about this show. There's clearly a lot of exposition. I mean, because a significant portion of this episode was a lot of talking. But then when like you said, when Brainiac took over and you had that moment and Seg, it was total video game and total, like, if you want superhero, that was your superhero moment. And I just, the looks on Jaina and Dev's faces whenever he was like picking out the Sagittari was just epic.
Jaina's eyes sold that whole sequence.
Yep. Like,
her eyes were so expressive in that. Hats off to the actress. Yeah. But it just was so funny to me. And I mean, I think a few episodes ago when Seg was really facing off with Brainiac, we were talking about how those two characters just talking on screen is very engaging and fascinating to watch. And we got a very similar moment again in this episode.
We did.
And it just, it makes me think why we've never, like, or it makes me think why they're able to pull this off on the smaller screen and never on the bigger screen. Mm. I just question, like, why that is, because there's sequences that I feel like are reminiscent of things that I've seen actually fail on the big screen, been attempted but not been as coherent. But in this show they do it in not just multiple episodes, but specifically in one episode.
Yeah, and it's because I was gonna say it's not like a movie where it's a self-contained universe for 2 hours. You only have these moments. I mean, this was truly a singular event in this episode. I mean, we've seen other things like it building up to it, but to your point, it definitely did work, and it worked convincingly.
Yeah, that's a good point, how convincing it was. There was a lot of momentum All the characters had already been set up to be in certain locations, and throughout the episode, you can kind of see where it's leading to. I mean, we see Jaina and Dev build their secret infiltration, to try to kill General Zod. Right. And then we see Seg and General Zod square off because they're alone, and Lyta's no longer around. She's off on her mission and then ends up being captured and used as bait. And we see Adam and Kem also get captured. Yeah. It's a lot of capturing going on.
A lot of capturing, yeah. They're like because you have all these very strong, like cunning characters with like Jax and Lyta and everyone, and then you sort of have Adam and Kim as sort of like Bill and Ted are just kind of like, oh dude, what's up? They just kind of get caught.
Yep. So okay, and yet for how much I love this show, I still have my issues with it, and they're always the same points, because there's a line in this episode where I think it's a line specifically about how Seg doesn't need Zod, or Zod doesn't need Seg, and I'm like, I'm sorry, wait, what? Does anybody know how time travel works around here? Because technically you're not born.
Yeah, it's. I just figure they're following the end game rules now at this point with time travel. It just doesn't make sense.
And see, I'm meanwhile sitting in the background, and I'm just like, wake up, people! You're from the future. and Lyta still has to be around to literally conceive and carry you, and Seg has to be the one to plant that seed. So I'm sorry, but you do still need your father because he hasn't done his one action. Okay.
Yeah, I get your point with that line with Zod. I think the character that frustrates me the most right now is Val.
Oh, the Cylon?
The Cylon.
Val,
yes.
The Cylon.
We've
established this, Will. Yes, he was the Cylon.
Yes, we have. That's why he frustrates me so much. He's like, he's so Pollyanna, like, and so, where everybody else on the show was thinking, he's supposed to be this brilliant scientist, and yet even like Kim is like thought 3 steps ahead about what's happening, and Val here is still stuck in, like, I guess they always say the L stands for hope, and but he's a hopeful fool at this point, because he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him.
Oh yeah, he's driving me crazy too, for a different reason, and for a similar reason that I've already mentioned. The scientist doesn't even make the connection that Zod is clearly from the future, has not yet been conceived. So of course the plan is to capture Lyta, and also I think it's also annoying because there's a lot of characters on this show that are very tactful in war games and politics. Oh, yeah. Val is completely removed from that.
Yeah.
He thinks that he is very suave in politics, but he's still a scientist, hopeful, and all of that. And it's kind of like, dude, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Let the adults continue playing, because clearly he doesn't want to play. He doesn't understand really what's at stake here, and his contributions are very minimal, in my opinion. And so this is why I stand by my already mentioned theory. Yep. Val is evil.
I don't know if he's a Cylon, but he definitely is. He definitely needs to just, season 3, Superman's great grandfather just needs to go to the retirement home, because he doesn't.
Back in the Phantom Zone where he belongs, and he was a lot more useful.
Yeah, he was more useful as a hologram in season 1, definitely. As a computer generator, yeah.
Yeah. I'm right there with you about him. I kind of zone out whenever he's on screen because I'm just like, dude, wake up,
Yeah.
face the reality of the situation. And also, why aren't you studying time travel more to understand?
Yes.
Nobody's looking into this.
Yeah.
Isn't that the key to how to defeat Zod back in
Exactly.
the future?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I just had a feeling once they go down that path, they're going to kind of tie it into Adam also being from the future
Mm-hmm.
and how that really screwed everything else up as well. And it wasn't just Zod, but it was Adam too.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? I mean, I'm wondering, Adam, you have the device. You know that Zod has come back and completely changed Kandor and the history. So are you gonna ever go back and now that Brainiac's defeated, go back and see what the future looks like now?
Right.
Like, is it when is that gonna happen?
Yeah. Well, we have five episodes, so we may see that, but or maybe further down the line. But all these changes. I mean, we obviously had potentially a game-changing moment. Everybody's selling it that way. All the cast members on socials and interviews and stuff are like, this was truly a game-changing moment. What happened at the end of this episode, and so, is it really, or is it just going to be the in-game rules, or is it going to just, we're going to find in episode 6 she's actually still alive, but to show Jax's like resolve, she had to sell this point to, show Zod. Well, maybe she was trying to, she was playing a game of chicken with Zod to try to get him to stand down so that he would look weak. But obviously, he's,
Now I understand who Jax is.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah,
I'm having a problem with remembering ancillary characters' names.
Yeah,
Forgive me.
Yeah, that's okay. She's yeah. The eyepiece, which was a pretty cool moment too, when she used her eye laser to take care of the them there at that moment.
It was a great moment because it also detached her from the weight that is carrying Val around.
Yeah, it did. In more ways than one. Yeah.
The dead weight of Val.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about this. Lyta is apparently dead, killed by Jax. Because Jax realized that she was being played a fool, and unlike Val, she doesn't want to be played a fool. Val is completely comfortable playing that. We're so mean to Val.
It's so easy to be mean to Val. It's so deserved.
So she, in a very shocking moment, there's a clear cutting of the throat, i.e. dead. However, I will say I watched very closely. That seemed a bit too on the skin. It didn't feel like it went deep enough. Also, we've seen on another comic book show a character get her throat sliced completely alive.
Yeah.
She just can't have her canary scream.
Right.
So it wouldn't. Here's the thing, because this does have time travel elements, and it is sci-fi.
Right.
They have two different options. Either it's exactly what we think. Either she is still alive and it was all an act, and they're gonna do something very early on in the next episode which reminds you, like, no, Lyta is still breathing and we're gonna save her. Or they can do some time travel and have one of those one-off episodes that typical series with time travel has, where you try to fix the thing multiple times. Or I'm sorry, was it 59 times on the Flash?
Yeah. Or 59, 50, or was it 50, maybe 52? That'll be like consistent with the comic book. New 52. Yeah, but in any event.
Yeah. So I mean, I mean, those are really what I foresee as their options. So now that I've declared there's only two options, the writers are gonna clearly find a third option and completely catch me off guard.
Yeah, I see. I'm hoping that it's actually legit. Like this is truly they truly write this character off because.
All right, Zack Snyder.
Well, yeah. No, well, I think if you want to have a game-changing moment and to basically, Zod had everything like structured out as far as his vision for this new Krypton, and it would be what, and also I think it also illustrates how blinded by love of Lyta Seg is, because it sort of reinforces that point. I mean, he could have possibly had saved her some point if he had not let her go to Wegthor, and really reinforced when Zod was trying to, when Lyta was really pushing to go, Seg could have backed up Zod and said, "No, you're right. You need to stay here on Kandor and let the rest of the Sagittari deal with the rebels up there." So I think it'll be a motivator for Seg because, another good thing about the show is it's very. There's a lot of shades of gray with all these characters. No one's clearly 100% good. No one's 100% evil, and given where Zod is, will it, further push him down that oppressor role that he, whereas before he was trying to, be all kindly, I have a vision for a bright future for Kandor. I wonder if it's going to push him into that dark future of what we typically think of when we think of Zod. With Seg, maybe it will, it'll motivate him to really not be blinded by his feelings so much, but and see things for how they really are versus then, because that's one of the things I was touching on earlier with Zod saying she's not brainwashed. I mean, this is who she is. And maybe Seg was blinded to who Lyta really is, and maybe this will, by this happening, he can finally see that.
Well, I think it's more about that. I mean, you bring up some excellent points, and I think what you're really getting at is kind of that thing, that dynamic that they set up in the first season. Lyta's from the House of Zod, Sagittari, military guild. They are always placing their country above every single other person, including their own family, including the people that they love. Mm-hmm. And so Zod wanting to literally have his cake and eat it too, in the sense of wanting to win the war, but also save his mom. Yeah. Like he can't have both. And so at the end of the day, he wants to win the war, and that might be at the sacrifice of Lyta. Seg, coming from the house of coming from the house of El, they are the exact opposite. It is more about family. It is more about hope. It is more about loving each other and not having to really force people to assimilate or to behave in a certain way, or like the military, they don't violence. Clearly, because Val hates violence, God forbid. Yeah. So to your point, I don't think it's more about Seg not letting his emotions control him, but more recognizing that, Lyta's the love of your life, but we're also focused on Kandor and what happens to Kandor in a few years, and saving all of these other people. Like, is her life really more important than everybody else? Mm-hmm. And it actually reminds me of something that I think even Adam has said at certain points in this season. Like, being a hero you have to learn how you need to sacrifice those people or those dynamics that you love more than everyone else or more than others, because you're supposed to be protecting everyone, not just a select few.
Right. Very good point.
So I think, like, well, they all are just bouncing off of your points, because I think, like, this is a strong case as why it may be interesting to see Lyta die at this point in the series. Now, because also Zod, they made it very clear in this episode, Zod's whole reason to come back is not only to save Kandor, but to re-envision what this place is so his mom doesn't fall down that path and get broken again.
Right. That's right.
So if she dies, like suddenly he might take the guilt of that and then realize that the only way to fix it is to actually rewrite this kind of parallel universe he's created, and to make it be like he never came back to begin with.
That you know what, I think you just solved it, because that would restore the continuity that we're familiar with.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this is a fickle thing, because if they go on that route, then it's kind of like, well, then what was the point of season 2?
Yeah.
But we had already had concerns about that at the season 1 finale.
Yeah.
Because we knew they were going to go the parallel universe route.
Yeah. Well, I think whatever resolution they have, I think an element of it will include what you just said, which it will possibly restore the original continuity that we know that leads to the birth of Kal-El. And then the question, then becomes, is Seg, if Lyta, with this other restored continuity, Lyta returns to us, is Seg and is Jor-El and Zod half brothers, which would be just a fascinating thing. But or is it some, or is it another person that we haven't been introduced yet?
Yeah, I think, with the way the season's going, I have no doubt that they're going to end it appropriately and have a great setup for season 3. And even if this turns out to be a parallel universe season where it's basically we watched something that never happens in the actual legend or the lineage, it was all worth it, because Brainiac is just creeping around.
Yeah, yep.
Creeping around.
Yes, he is.
And I mean, at the end of the day, the true love story is not Seg and Lyta again this season. It is between Seg and Brainiac.
Yep.
Remember that.
Always remember that, folks.
And Lobo and Adam. Oh, man. So, steps to restore the timeline. Zod has to be sent back and never have come forward to begin with. Step 2, Val ends up in the Phantom Zone, and that's it for us tonight, people. Leave you on that note. Will, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me at Will M. Polk. That's WILLMPOLK.
And you can find me at SJ Belmont, SJBELMONT. Please follow our crew on Twitter at SNN Nerd. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. But most importantly, rate, subscribe, and comment on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. Good night, Geek Out. You're welcome.